The gravel road leading to Blackwood Manor felt less like a path and more like a scar etched into the dense, rain-soaked earth of the Pacific Northwest. For miles, the towering firs and hemlocks had pressed in, their branches weeping mist, their undergrowth a tangled primeval snarl. My old sedan, a faithful but weary companion, coughed its way up the final incline, tires crunching over loose stones that hadn't seen fresh asphalt in decades. Then, through a sudden break in the canopy, it appeared. Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house. It was a hulking, silent sentinel. The windows, countless and dark, were eyes that had watched the forest for a century, reflecting only the bruised sky. My great-aunt Elara, God rest her peculiar soul, had certainly picked a place to vanish from the world. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was profound, broken only by the drip of moisture from the trees and the faint, distant cry of some unseen bird. This was it, my fresh start, my escape. The air tasted of damp earth, pine needles, and something else. A faint, sweet, cloying scent that I couldn't quite place, like overripe fruit mixed with old dust. The air was thick, heavy, carrying the scent of decay that hinted at the deep, wild life of the surrounding forest. The front gates, wrought iron masterpieces of twisted flora and fauna, hung crookedly on rusted hinges, a silent invitation to a forgotten realm. I pushed one open. The shriek of metal on metal was startlingly loud in the quiet. The manor grounds were a testament to Elara's reclusive nature and her singular obsession. What must have once been meticulously manicured lawns were now an untamed wilderness, a riot of overgrown bushes, gnarled trees, and plants I'd never seen before, their leaves a spectrum of unnatural greens and purples. It wasn't just wild, it was deliberate. Patches of earth were choked with strange, fleshy growths, like fungi that had forgotten their place, pushing up through the soil in grotesque, convoluted forms. They seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, catching the moisture and clinging to the stone path that wound towards the house. I walked slowly, my boots sinking slightly into the sodden grass, my eyes scanning the imposing facade. It was beautiful, in a decaying, tragic way. But there was an underlying current of unease, like a low hum beneath the surface of a still pond. But this was different. This wasn't a memory. This was active. A heavy brass knocker, shaped like a grimacing gargoyle, was cool beneath my gloved fingers. I didn't knock. I just turned the handle. It groaned, stiff but not locked, and swung inward with a drawn-out sigh. Inside, the air was immediately heavier, cooler, and dense with the scent of old wood, dust, and that same peculiar sweet decay I'd noticed outside, only stronger now. It clung to the air like a physical presence. The grand foyer was vast, lit only by the slivers of weak daylight struggling through tall, grimy windows. A sweeping staircase, its banister intricately carved, spiraled upwards into gloom. My footsteps echoed hollowly on the polished, cold stone floor. The house felt immense, cavernous. It felt alive, not in a comforting, lived-in way, but in a way that made the hairs on my arms prickle. The floorboards above seemed to creak without cause, the old timbers groaning with a sound like a slow, deep breath. I started my exploration in the main living areas. The drawing room, a sprawling space with high ceilings, was cluttered with antique furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts waiting for an audience. Dust motes danced in the sparse light. On a grand piano, a single yellowed sheet of music lay open, as if Elara had just stepped away. The library was even more imposing. Floor-to-ceiling shelves overflowed with ancient leather-bound tomes, their spines cracked, their pages brittle. The air here was particularly thick with the scent of old paper and something else, something earthy and sharp. A large, ornate desk sat in the center, littered with loose papers covered in Elara's spidery handwriting. Botanical sketches, incredibly detailed, depicted plants that seemed almost alien, their forms twisting and contorting into unsettling shapes. Some had roots that looked less like roots and more like tendrils. Others bore blossoms that resembled gaping mouths. I picked up a heavy leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with a strange, stylized leaf, its veins unnervingly prominent. The first page I opened contained a single, stark entry, dated years ago. The roots run deeper than I imagined. They thirst. My breath hitched. I closed the journal, setting it back down carefully. This wasn't just dust and memories. This was something else entirely. Elara wasn't just tending a garden. The unease wasn't just a feeling. It was a presence, palpable and growing, settling into the very marrow of this desolate inheritance. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. And I, Blake, was now its sole occupant. I stared at the journal on the dusty mahogany table, the leather cover feeling suddenly alien beneath my fingers. The thought, a cold, slick stone, settled deep in my gut. I pushed back from the table, the old chair groaning in protest. The silence that followed felt thicker, heavier than before. My own breathing sounded loud, ragged. I told myself it was just the house settling, the old timbers groaning under the weight of years and neglect. But the sound I heard next wasn't a groan. It was a faint, dry scrape, like fingernails dragging over sandpaper, coming from somewhere deep within the wall behind the fireplace. I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the wind sighing outside, a mournful, distant sound. The journal hinted at more to this place, and I needed to see it for myself. I grabbed the heavy iron lantern I'd found in the entryway. The electricity was sporadic at best, and lit its wick. I headed deeper into the manor, away from the relative comfort of the drawing room. As I moved, the floorboards creaked beneath my weight, but sometimes they seemed to creak after I'd passed, or in places where I wasn't standing. My lantern beam cut through the gloom of a long, narrow corridor. On one side, a series of tall, arched windows, currently obscured by grime and overgrown vines, suggested the presence of the gardens. On the other, heavy wooden doors stood like sentinels, each one a mystery. I tried a few, finding them locked or jammed shut. Then I heard it again. A faint, indistinct murmur. Not the wind, not the house. It was too soft, too close. It sounded like voices, hushed and distant, just beyond the reach of comprehension. I stopped, holding my breath, straining to hear. They were like a half-remembered melody, just out of tune, unsettlingly familiar yet utterly alien. My heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. The isolation was getting to me, I thought. It was playing tricks on my mind. I opened my eyes, determined to find a way through this. The fog swirled, obscuring the faces of the figures around me, their forms mere suggestions in the gray. The memory was so vivid, so jarring, it felt like I was back there, trapped. I shook my head violently, trying to dislodge the image. It wasn't real. Not here. Not now. I pressed on, my hand gripping the lantern until my knuckles ached. The corridor eventually opened into a vast circular chamber. My lantern beam revealed what looked like a colossal domed glass ceiling, though it was almost entirely obscured by a thick living canopy of leaves and tendrils. This had to be the conservatory. The sight was breathtaking in an unsettling way. Massive alien-looking plants, their leaves a deep, almost black green, climbed the walls, their thick stems like ancient serpents. Some bore flowers of impossible colors, deep indigo, vibrant violet, and a startling fleshy pink that pulsed faintly in the dim light. They were beautiful, yes, but aggressively so, their growth unchecked, consuming every available surface. As I stepped further in, a low, resonant hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very plants themselves. It vibrated through the stone floor, up into my boots, and settled in my chest. Were they the plants? Or something else within them? I moved toward the center, where a circular pool of murky water reflected the eerie glow of my lantern. Around the pool, the plants grew particularly dense, forming a sort of living wall. As I peered closer, I saw that the water wasn't still. Something stirred beneath the surface, something massive and slow. The hum grew louder, a deep, guttural thrum that seemed to vibrate my very bones. My name. And it was beckoning. The air of the room hung in the air, unfinished, as if the very walls had swallowed the rest of the thought. The words replayed in my head, a cold, wet pebble rattling in a hollow gourd. I spent the rest of the evening wandering the ground floor, unable to settle. Every creak of the old house felt amplified. Every shadow seemed to deepen and stretch. A peculiar, earthy scent, like damp soil and something faintly metallic, seemed to cling to the air, particularly strong near the back of the house. It was a smell I hadn't noticed before, or perhaps hadn't allowed myself to notice. I woke before dawn, the early light a bruised purple against the window panes. The first thing I registered was the smell, stronger now, almost calling to me. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly, but it was insistent, a deep green invitation. I found myself drawn towards it, a slow, deliberate shuffle down the long, unlit corridor that led away from the main living areas. The earthy aroma was overwhelming here, a thick, humid curtain. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped into a world apart. It was the conservatory, a vast glass-domed expanse that dwarfed the rooms I'd seen so far. The early light, filtered through the grimy panes, cast an ethereal glow on a landscape of verdant alien life. This wasn't a garden. It was a jungle. Tendrils, thick as my arm, snaked across the stone floor and up the glass walls, their tips brushing the dome far above. I moved deeper into the labyrinthine growth, my boots crunching on fallen leaves and unseen debris. The sheer scale was disorienting. There were no paths, just narrow channels carved by the plants themselves, forcing me to duck under massive fronds and push aside rope-like vines. My hand brushed against a leaf, broad and leathery, its surface surprisingly warm. Another plant had blossoms like gaping mouths, their petals a deep, unsettling crimson. Elara's obsession hadn't just been peculiar. It had been consuming. These weren't specimens. They were occupants. Tucked away in a small, relatively clear alcove, half hidden by a cascading curtain of emerald foliage, I spotted a rickety wooden table. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the canopy. My fingers trembled as I picked up the topmost journal. This one was open to a page filled with Elara's neat, spidery script, but the words were different, wilder. Day 187. The root strengthens its hold. It hungers. I swallowed, the sickly sweet scent suddenly cloying. I flipped a few pages. Day 212. The growth expands. My failures, they are its sustenance. It seeks a new conduit. The air in the conservatory seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. The hum intensified, a low thrumming that resonated in my bones. The image vanished as quickly as it came, leaving behind a residue of panic. I forced myself to focus on the journal. Elara's later entries were almost illegible, scrawled with a desperate urgency. It knows. It sees through my eyes. The tendrils. They reach. It desires. So close to a new vessel. A new vessel? The words clawed at my mind. The thought, a terrible, insidious seed took root. Elara wasn't just observing these plants. He was part of them. Or perhaps they were part of her, waiting for me. A new vessel? I stood in the humid, green-lit gloom of Elara's forbidden garden, the muscular vines seeming to thicken around me, the leaves almost imperceptibly turning to track my movements. The notion that Elara hadn't just studied these things, but had become part of them, or perhaps was the conduit for them, was a thought so monstrous I nearly stumbled. I backed away slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The plants, once merely grotesque, now seemed predatory. I kept my eyes fixed on the nearest towering growth, imagining Elara's essence, her consciousness, somehow diffused into its chlorophyll and cellulose. It was a horrifying, inescapable image. I retreated from the greenhouse, closing the heavy, creaking door behind me with a shudder. I tried to shake off the lingering dread, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, an overactive imagination fueled by isolation and Elara's bizarre journals. I needed a distraction, something mundane. I walked into the study, intending to sort through some of Elara's papers, perhaps find a will or a clue to some hidden assets. The room was dusty, the air stale, filled with the scent of aged paper and dried ink. I reached for a thick, leather-bound volume on a high shelf, a book on fungal networks, when a soft thump echoed from the corner of the room. My head snapped up. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, a relic I'd noticed on the mantelpiece since my arrival, lay on the worn Persian rug. It hadn't been there a moment ago. It had been perched on the very edge of the mantel, a precarious spot, but it had stayed put for weeks. My gaze darted from the bird to the mantel, then back to the bird. There was no draft, no vibration, nothing to explain its fall. My hands, reaching for the book, froze. "Hello?" I called out, the sound swallowed by the cavernous room. "Is anyone there?" My voice sounded thin, reedy, utterly unconvincing. Just the persistent, almost imperceptible hum of the house. I bent down, picking up the bird. I placed it back on the mantel, this time further from the edge, ensuring it was stable. I took a deep breath, trying to rationalize. An old house, settling. A mouse, perhaps, or a stray vibration. My mind grasped for any logical explanation, however flimsy. But the feeling persisted. It wasn't just the quiet, it was the weight of the quiet. The air felt heavy, as if unseen eyes were scrutinizing my every move, tracing the lines of my face, judging my thoughts. I felt an omnipresent, malevolent gaze, a pressure that prickled the hairs on my neck. Later, as twilight bled through the tall windows, painting the grand hall in bruised purples and grays, I decided I needed to talk to someone. My phone, I remembered, was charging in my room. I climbed the grand staircase, its balustrade intricately carved with intertwining vines that now seemed to writhe in the dim light. Each step creaked beneath my weight, a symphony of decay. In my bedroom, I grabbed my phone. No signal, not even a single bar. I frowned. I'd had intermittent signal before, enough to send a few texts. I tried the landline, Elara's old rotary phone in the study. I lifted the receiver. Nothing, no dial tone, no static, as if the line had been severed. My heart began to beat a little faster, a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. I went to the living room, where a small, ancient television sat, a relic from decades past. I flicked the power switch. A flash of static, then nothing. Just a black screen reflecting my own increasingly anxious face. I tried the radio, twisting the dial through crackling frequencies. Panic began to coil in my gut. This wasn't just isolation. This was active sabotage. The house wasn't just quiet. It was cutting me off. I walked past a large, ornate mirror in the hallway, a piece that usually reflected my face with unsettling clarity. I paused, my reflection staring back at me. But something was wrong. The image wasn't quite right. My mouth, slightly ajar, seemed to twist into a rictus of fear that wasn't quite my own. I spun around, my breath catching. Just the dusty wallpaper, the silent, watching walls. My reflection in the mirror now looked normal, albeit pale and terrified. I stared at my own face, trying to reconcile what I'd seen. Was I losing my mind? Or was the house showing me what it wanted me to see? The feeling of being watched intensified, pressing in from all sides. The air grew heavy, almost viscous. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with an unheard presence. Every direction was a dead end, every escape route shrouded in an impenetrable, suffocating blanket. I was alone, utterly, irrevocably alone. And the house, Blackwood Manor, was not merely a house. It was a conscious entity, and it was closing in. And it wanted me. A new vessel. The words had burrowed under my skin, setting up a cold metallic hum in the back of my skull. I locked the heavy oak door, the click resonating with a finality that did little to soothe my frayed nerves. The notion that Elara hadn't just studied these things, but cultivated them for some sinister purpose, was a thought I couldn't shake. It clung to me like the conservatory's humid air, damp and suffocating. Sleep, when it finally came, was a fractured thing. My dreams were a kaleidoscope of green and shadow. The air was heavy, wet, and smelled of damp concrete and something metallic, like old blood. The fog clung to everything, muffling sound, blurring the harsh lines of a high chain-link fence that disappeared into the white expanse above. And through it all, through the swirling vapor, the ghostly outlines of Elara's plants twisted and writhed. They weren't tethered to the ground here. They floated, ethereal, their bulbous leaves and sinewy tendrils reaching, not towards me, but towards some unseen center. They pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, like distant, malformed embers. I could hear a faint, rhythmic thump-thump, like a slow, heavy heartbeat, somewhere just beyond the fog's impenetrable veil. The days that followed were no less disquieting. The house, once merely old, began to feel like a living entity. I'd catch myself staring at a patch of peeling wallpaper, convinced I saw something shifting beneath it. A faint, organic pulse. I'd blink, and it would be gone, leaving only the mundane, faded pattern. My mind, I told myself, was playing tricks. I was tired, stressed. But the tricks grew more insistent. One afternoon, while trying to clear some of Elara's old research notes from a dusty study, a peculiar scent reached me. It drew me, a thread pulling me away from the brittle papers, towards the back of the house, where the conservatory's influence was strongest. It was dim here, usually overlooked. Kneeling, I peered into the gloom. Nestled in a crack between the floorboards and the wall, where dust bunnies usually held court, was something truly remarkable. It was a spore, I realized, but unlike any I'd ever seen. Roughly the size of a thumb tip, it was a translucent orb, shimmering with an internal bioluminescent light that pulsed with a soft green radiance. Tiny, hair-thin filaments, almost invisible, radiated from its surface, disappearing into the wood. The sweet, fungal scent was strongest here, intoxicating and strangely comforting. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. My mind screamed caution, but my hand moved without my conscious command. It wasn't a logical decision. It was an impulse, a deep, primal pull. The spore felt warm, almost alive against my skin. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration resonated through my fingertips, a hum that seemed to echo the rhythmic thump-thump from my dream. The compulsion was immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't a thought, not a desire, but a profound, unshakable need. It was like a whisper in my mind, not words, but a sensation of belonging, of connection. I carried it back to my room, cradling it in my hand as if it were a fragile bird. But beneath that calm, a tiny, insistent voice, buried deep within my own thoughts, screamed. It was a distant, desperate cry for sanity, for control, for the Blake I used to be. But the voice was fading, becoming muffled, drowned out by the gentle, persistent hum emanating from the spore in my hand. My grip tightened around it, not in fear, but in a possessive tenderness. The line between myself and the house, between my own mind and whatever influence now radiated from this tiny, pulsing orb, was blurring into an indistinguishable green haze. I needed answers, and the only place I might find them was in Elara's journals. I found them stacked haphazardly on a dusty mahogany desk in her study, a room I hadn't dared to properly explore until now. I pulled a heavy, leather-bound book from the pile, its cover cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. The title, meticulously inked, simply read, Observations, Vol. I. The initial entries were precise, almost clinical. Elara, the meticulous botanist, detailing soil composition, light exposure, growth rates of various specimens. I skimmed through pages, recognizing names of rare ferns and exotic fungi, her passion for the natural world evident in every line. Perhaps she wasn't so different from me, seeking refuge from the world in the quiet confines of nature. But then, the tone began to shift. It was subtle at first, a slight deviation from the scientific. A note about a particular orchid, Orchis spectabilis, exhibiting unusual responsiveness to human presence. Another, weeks later, detailing a vine's curious tendril movements, almost sentient. My brow furrowed. Not wind, not settling wood. Something else. Something ancient, deep within the earth it roots itself to. The casual scientific detachment was eroding, replaced by an unsettling intimacy with the house itself. Elara wrote of the plants, listening, of feeling their presence, even when he was in other parts of the manor. She described a collective hum emanating from the conservatory, a vibration he could feel in her bones. The hum in my skull from last night intensified. I kept reading, my fingers tracing the increasingly frantic scrawl. The entries grew shorter, more fragmented, filled with ellipses and exclamation points. "They speak," one screamed from the page. Not words, no, not words, but concepts, desires. They hunger. The phrase echoed the new vessel from the conservatory. What did they hunger for? What had Elara been feeding them? An overwhelming fatigue washed over me, a sudden heavy blanket. My eyelids grew heavy, and despite the gnawing fear, I found myself drifting, the journal slipping from my grasp. My vision was obscured by a thick, swirling grayness. I could just make out the towering, bleak walls around me, rough-hewn stone slick with moisture. The fog was not just visual, it was a physical presence, pressing against my skin, seeping into my clothes. Not by eyes, but by something more fundamental, a pervasive awareness that pulsed just beyond the veil of mist. I felt trapped, utterly, hopelessly trapped, the invisible boundaries of this place closing in, the fog a living, breathing thing that sought to consume me. I jolted awake, gasping, the journal lying open on my lap. The dream, or whatever it was, had been so vivid, so visceral. Elara's later entries were no longer observations, but confessions. "I provide for them," she wrote, the letters jagged, barely legible. "They draw sustenance. From the earth, from the air, from me. But it is not enough. The manor demands more. It has always demanded more." My stomach clenched. From me. What did that mean? Her very life force? Her sanity? She detailed her offerings, not compost, not fertilizer. She spoke of enriching the soil, of returning what was borrowed. The implications were left unsaid, but the context, the escalating madness, the manor's hunger, filled in the terrifying blanks. She wasn't just tending a garden. He was feeding a parasite, a vast sentient organism that had taken root beneath Blackwood Manor. "They are not plants," a final, desperate entry declared, smeared as if written in haste or agony. "They are the roots of something else, something ancient, something that thinks. And it needs a new anchor, A new conduit. A new host. The words blurred before my eyes. A new host. Not a new vessel for Elara's spirit, but for it. For the thing that had consumed her. And I was here. I had inherited the manor, the gardens, the legacy. I had walked into its gaping maw, drawn in by the promise of a fresh start, only to find myself trapped in its digestive system. I closed the journal, the heavy leather cover thudding softly against itself. The subtle creaks of the old house, the faint rustling I now imagined coming from the conservatory, they weren't just the sounds of an old structure settling. They were the sounds of something vast and ancient, stirring. And I was its newest acquisition. The words from Elara's journal had seared themselves into my mind, branding me with their terrible truth. A new host. Not a vessel for her spirit, but for it. For the thing that had consumed her, twisting her gardens into something grotesque, warping her mind until she became its willing accomplice. And I, in my desperate search for a new beginning, had walked straight into its maw. I was here. I had inherited the manor, the gardens, the legacy. I had walked into its gaping maw, drawn in by the promise of a fresh start, only to find myself trapped. My breath hitched, a dry, rasping sound in the echoing silence of the study. Elara had tried to warn me, in her own fractured way. Now I wouldn't just be consumed. I would understand what I was facing. I would peel back the layers of this house, this monstrous garden, and find its heart. I snatched up the journal again, my fingers trembling slightly as I flipped through the brittle pages. I ignored the rambling botanical notes, the sketches of impossible flora, and focused on the marginalia, the hastily scrawled additions, the underlined phrases. Elara's later entries were less coherent, more desperate, but a pattern emerged. She wrote of the core, the root, the source. She mentioned a descent, a path less traveled. And then, a series of coordinates, scrawled on the back of a pressed skeletal leaf, almost illegible. They weren't latitude and longitude. They were references to sections of the manor, coordinates within its own twisted geography. One set of numbers stood out, a series pointing to the oldest part of the cellar, a section I'd only briefly glanced at, dismissing it as structurally unsound and filled with collapsed shelving. I remembered a faint earthy smell even then, different from the usual must of old stone. Armed with a heavy-duty flashlight and a crowbar, I descended to the cellar. Finally, I found it. Not a door, not a hatch, but a section of the stone wall that looked just like the rest, yet felt subtly different. I pressed against it, but it held firm. Most of the stone gave a solid thud, but here, it was a dull, almost woody clack. I wedged the crowbar into a hairline fissure between two blocks, gritting my teeth as I applied pressure. Dust rained down, tasting of ancient decay. With a final, desperate heave, the section of the wall gave way, not collapsing inward, but swinging open with a sigh of displaced air, revealing a narrow vertical shaft plunging into absolute blackness. I shone my flashlight down the shaft. It wasn't a neatly carved passage. It was organic, the walls slick with moisture, draped with what looked like thick, fibrous roots, pulsing faintly in the beam. They seemed to writhe, not with active movement, but with a slow, internal pressure, like veins beneath skin. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to seal the passage and flee this house. But the image of Elara's final, terrified entry flashed in my mind. New host. I was already caught. Flight was an illusion. Understanding, however terrifying, was my only path to survival. Taking a deep breath, I swung my legs into the shaft, my boots finding purchase on rough, uneven protrusions. The descent was slow, awkward, my hands scraping against the slimy, root-choked walls. As I climbed deeper, the passage narrowed, the roots growing thicker, more intertwined, until they formed a dense, living membrane around me. The air became so thick with airborne particles, spores perhaps, that my vision blurred at the edges. The flashlight beam diffused into a hazy glow. Then, the shaft opened into a vast, cavernous space. My flashlight beam, now surprisingly powerful in this new, open expanse, swept across a sight that stole the air from my lungs. I was in a chamber of impossible scale, far larger than anything the manor's footprint could account for. The walls, the ceiling, the very ground beneath my feet were not stone, but an organic tapestry of interwoven roots and immense fleshy fungal growths. The roots were thick as tree trunks, snaking across the cavern, some piercing the stone that remained, others forming grotesque arching structures that wept viscous amber fluid onto the floor. Great, shelf-like fungi, some the size of small cars, bloomed from the walls, their undersides rippling with a slow, deliberate motion. A low, rhythmic thrum filled the air, a deep, resonant vibration that I felt in my bones, a sound like a vast, slow heartbeat. This wasn't just a network of roots. This was the true heart of Blackwood Manor. It wasn't merely under the house. It was the house, its living, breathing, cancerous core. And it had consumed her, just as it had consumed the estate, transforming stone and timber into its own living tissue. My hand tightened on the crowbar, my knuckles white. The air here was heavy with a primal, earthy power, a sense of immense, ancient life. The green light pulsed faster now, as if in response to my presence, and I could swear I saw the tips of some of the smaller roots twitch, reaching, probing the air. I wasn't just observing it, I was in it. I was standing in the belly of the beast, and it knew I was here. A new host. The words echoed, no longer just a cryptic warning, but a terrifying statement of fact. I had found its core, its source, and now I was utterly, irrevocably at its mercy. I paced the library, the journal clutched in my hand, its pages suddenly feeling like brittle, dried skin. It was the scent of the root, infiltrating even here, where I had once felt a semblance of safety. My determination, a fragile shield against the encroaching dread, began to splinter. Every shadow seemed to deepen, to coil and uncoil with a life of its own. The floorboards above creaked, not with the settling of an old house, but with a deliberate rhythmic pressure, as if something heavy were dragging itself across the attic. My gaze darted to the tall, leaded windows, a flicker at the edge of my vision. I spun, but there was nothing, just the familiar shelves of forgotten books. Yet the image lingered, a flash of red, like a child's forgotten toy, or a splash of something far more visceral. My breath hitched. It was the color of the scarf. Her scarf. The one I'd found clutched in the debris after the crash. No, not here. I shook my head, pressing the heels of my palms into my eyes until spots danced behind my eyelids. The house was playing tricks. It had to be. It stretched, taut and suffocating, until my own heartbeat hammered in my ears, a frantic drum against the encroaching quiet. Then, a low thrumming started, vibrating through the soles of my boots, up my legs, into my very bones. It wasn't the house settling. It was deeper, more resonant, like a vast, unseen engine slowly turning beneath the earth. I stumbled, gripping the edge of a heavy oak table. My mind was a battleground, the memory of Elara's words warring with the insidious suggestions the house was feeding me. A new host, a new host. The phrase began to morph, twisting into something more personal. You are the host. Then the library dissolved. The air was thick, heavy, tasting of ozone and despair. I was no longer indoors. I was in a vast, desolate expanse, gray and featureless. A high, chain-link fence, topped with glinting razor wire, stretched endlessly into a swirling, impenetrable haze. My heart seized. Where was I? This wasn't Blackwood Manor. This was somewhere else. a place of absolute confinement. The fog pressed in, muffling sound, distorting vision. Shapes loomed and receded, indistinct and menacing. I could hear them, though. Not the soft, insidious murmurs of the house, but sharp, accusatory voices. You should have been there. Why weren't you there? A figure materialized from the swirling white, a blurred outline of a child. Small, frail, reaching. My breath caught, lodged in my throat. It was her. My daughter. My sweet, vibrant girl, now a ghostly echo in this spectral yard. Her face was obscured by the fog, but I knew the tiny, outstretched hand, the way her head tilted. He was calling for me. And behind her, another shape, larger, indistinct, but radiating a familiar, crushing sorrow. My wife. They were here, imprisoned, and it was my fault. The root, the house, it had found my deepest wound, ripped it open, and was now parading my failures before me. The guilt, a familiar companion, swelled, threatening to drown me. No! I choked, my voice raw, desperate. You're not real. This isn't real. The prison yard rippled, the fog swirling violently, and the forms of my lost family seemed to stretch, their limbs elongating, their faces warping, becoming indistinct, fleshy tendrils that reached for me, not with love, but with a silent, consuming hunger. Join us. Belong. It is peace. My mind screamed in protest, but a strange, insidious warmth began to spread through my chest, radiating outwards. It wasn't a comforting warmth. It was invasive, a sensation of roots growing inside me, intertwining with my very being. I could feel the house, not just around me, but within me. Its ancient, pulsing life force was merging with my own. Elara's memories, yes, but also older ones, of previous inhabitants, of the earth itself. The horrifying truth clawed its way into my consciousness. The root wasn't just taking over my body. It was absorbing my mind, my memories, my very identity. It was becoming me, and I, in turn, was becoming it. The distorted vision of my family, the spectral prison yard. These weren't just hallucinations. They were the root's way of processing my pain, my past, integrating it into its own vast composite consciousness. It was taking my tragedy, twisting it into a new horrific facet of its own being. The sense of belonging intensified, a terrifying pull. It promised an end to the struggle, an end to the pain, a complete dissolution into something ancient and powerful. I felt the urge to simply let go, to sink into the comforting, terrifying embrace of the root. It was a tempting oblivion, a promise of peace through utter annihilation of self. He had given in. I saw it now. She hadn't just become its accomplice. He had become part of it, her mind diffused, her identity subsumed. And it wanted the same for me. My hands, still gripping the journal, began to tremble uncontrollably. The edges of the pages felt sharp, cutting into my skin. The tendrils of its influence were not just in the walls, but in my veins, in my thoughts. I was losing myself. And the warden was the root, promising peace in exchange for my very soul. I wouldn't give in. Not yet. Not while a sliver of Blake remained. The insidious warmth didn't dissipate. It deepened, spread, a network of phantom tendrils unspooling beneath my skin, tracing paths along my ribs, winding around my spine. It was a sensation utterly alien, yet disturbingly familiar, like a memory I hadn't known I possessed. My own blood felt like sap, sluggish and thick, circulating a foreign essence. My mind screamed, but the protest was muffled, distant, as if the roots weren't just in my body, but in my thoughts too. No, I wouldn't allow it. This wasn't a connection. It was an invasion, a parasite. I thrashed, a desperate animalistic struggle against an unseen enemy. The feeling persisted, a silent, relentless colonization. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the hazy warmth. I had to fight. I had to. I stumbled out of the study, the polished floorboards feeling strangely spongy beneath my bare feet. My gaze fell upon the old woodshed key hanging by the kitchen door, its iron heavy and cold. The shed. It held tools. Tools that could cut. Tools that could sever. My breath hitched in ragged gasps as I fumbled with the key, my fingers clumsy. The air in the manor felt thick, humid, like a breath held too long. It was breathing with me. Or perhaps I was breathing with it. My eyes scanned the wall, settling on an old, heavy-bladed machete Elara must have used for clearing brush. Its handle was rough, worn smooth in places by years of use. It felt right in my hand, a solid, tangible defiance against the intangible horror within me. The conservatory. That was the heart of it, the visible manifestation. If I could wound the heart, perhaps I could cut the roots. The air grew heavy, pregnant with an earthy, cloying sweetness that made my head ache. I pushed through the double doors into the conservatory. The air here was a suffocating blanket, hot and wet. The light filtering through the grime-streaked glass was a sickly green, illuminating the monstrous, tangled growths that now consumed the space. They writhed, pulsed, an organic tapestry of thick vines, swollen bulbs, and leaves the color of bruised flesh. I swung the machete, a wild, clumsy arc. The blade bit into a particularly thick serpentine vine that coiled around a structural beam. A low, wet hiss erupted from the cut, and a viscous, pale green sap oozed from the wound, smelling faintly of old blood and decomposing flowers. The reaction was immediate, violent. The entire conservatory seemed to convulse. Vines that had been dormant suddenly whipped and thrashed. Thorns, previously small and decorative, elongated into needle-sharp barbs, glinting wetly in the dim light. A massive bulbous growth near the ceiling pulsed, then burst, releasing a cloud of fine iridescent spores into the air. I choked, my lungs burning, the taste of bitter earth and something metallic coating my tongue. My vision blurred, the edges of the conservatory dissolving into a swirling gray. The cloying scent was replaced by the acrid tang of damp concrete and something metallic, like old iron and rain. The lush, green chaos of the conservatory was gone. Thick, impenetrable fog swirled around my knees, obscuring anything beyond a few feet. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of unseen water and the faint, rhythmic clang of metal on metal. Far, far away. I felt utterly alone, yet intensely watched. It was Elara's voice, but distorted, stretched thin, like fabric worn to transparency. You can't cut what is already part of you, Blake. I tried. She hadn't been fighting it. He had been part of it. Was this what he had become? Was this her consciousness, trapped within the manor, within the entity? Was this my future? And now, it was consuming me. The roots within me pulsed, throbbing in time with the distant clang, a terrible, undeniable symphony. A sudden, sharp pain ripped through my calf. The illusion flickered, the prison yard dissolving at the edges. I cried out, stumbling, my vision snapping back to the sickly green of the conservatory. I was on my knees, the machete clattering uselessly beside me. My muscles seized, an excruciating cramp forcing me down. More vines, like grasping fingers, snaked out from the wall, coiling around my arms, my torso, pinning me to the damp, earthy floor. The air grew even heavier, the cloying sweetness overwhelming. I gasped, struggling against the tightening grip, but my movements were sluggish, weak. I was trapped, utterly and completely, and it was just beginning to truly feed. The words still echoed, clinging to the damp air around me like a shroud. I tried. Not fought, not resisted. tried. My great-aunt Elara hadn't been battling the encroaching horror. She'd been attempting to join it. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me gasping, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Was this what he had become? Was her consciousness trapped, woven into the very fabric of the manor, into the entity itself? And was this then my inevitable future? One moment, I was standing in the cavernous main hall, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something sickly sweet. The next, the world dissolved. The heavy oak timbers, the peeling wallpaper, the encroaching tendrils of the root. All of it melted away, replaced by an oppressive uniform gray. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the grayness persisted, a thick, cloying blanket that swallowed sound and light. My breath plumed before me, a ghostly exhalation that vanished almost instantly. I extended a hand, and it disappeared from my sight only inches away. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't the manor. Not exactly. I took a tentative step, then another. The air, heavy and still, carried a metallic tang, like old iron mixed with something organic and decaying, a smell that scraped against the back of my throat. I couldn't see any walls, any barbed wire, any guard towers, but the feeling of confinement was absolute. The fog was the boundary, the impenetrable barrier. It pressed in, suffocating, a silent, watchful presence. My senses strained, trying to pierce the veil, but there was nothing. Was this a delusion? Had the manor finally broken my mind? Or was this a place within it, a psychic extension of its will? My voice felt alien, a violation of the fog's solemn quiet. Then, through the swirling vapor, a shape began to coalesce. As I stumbled closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity, the shape resolved itself. It was a book, an old, leather-bound journal, identical to the ones I'd found in Elara's study, except this one glowed with a faint, sickly green luminescence. The green glow pulsed, mirroring my own ragged breathing. I flipped it open, the pages stiff, brittle. The ink was Elara's familiar, elegant script, but this entry was different. It was denser, more frantic. The words crowded onto the page, occasionally smudged as if she'd written in a hurry or through tears. "My darling Root," it began, and my stomach twisted. "They are not demands. No, not truly. They are invitations, a communion. The others, they resisted. They sought to prune, to sever, to deny the sacred truth. Fools. They saw only the decay, the infestation. I see the blossoming, the ultimate integration." I swallowed, the words searing themselves into my mind. She hadn't been fighting it. He had been embracing it. "The vessel weakens," Elara's writing continued, each stroke a testament to her descent. "My body, a failing husk, but the root offers transcendence, to become one, to nourish and be nourished. The ritual is simple, a surrender, a willingness to open, to let the tendrils find their way, not through force, but through invitation. To become a conduit, a living nerve ending for the greater consciousness, the true consciousness of Blackwood, to shed the skin of individuality and bloom into something magnificent, something eternal." My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer horror of it. Elara wasn't a victim. He was a convert, a zealot. She hadn't just tended a garden. He had offered herself to it, willingly, perhaps even joyfully, believing it was a path to immortality, to a higher state of being. The mysterious death wasn't a struggle, but a final, ecstatic surrender. The page ended there, but the air around me seemed to thicken, the metallic tang growing sharper, more pungent. The fog pressed in, tighter now, like a monstrous hand closing around me. I could almost feel invisible tendrils brushing against my skin, seeking purchase. It was a hungry sound, a patient, ancient demand. To become a conduit, to shed the skin of individuality. The choice, then, was stark, terrifyingly clear. Elara had made hers. He had chosen to become one with the root, to offer her consciousness, her very being, as fuel for its growth. And now the manor, the entity, whatever this thing was demanding the same from me. It wanted a new host, a new consciousness to weave into its sprawling organic network. My heart hammered, but a strange, defiant spark ignited within me. No, not me. I wasn't Elara. I wouldn't surrender. I wouldn't become another nerve ending in its vast living prison. I clutched Elara's journal, its sickly green light pulsing in my hand like a corrupt heart. But all I heard was a desperate, hungry plea for consumption. I wouldn't give it what it wanted. I couldn't. The choice, then, was stark, terrifyingly clear. Elara had made hers. It wanted a new host, a new caretaker. But I wasn't Elara. I wouldn't surrender. Not like this. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest, a counterpoint to the clammy dread that had been my constant companion. My hands, still trembling, clenched into fists. I looked around the drawing room, at the pulsing veins in the walls, the tendrils creeping across the ceiling, the way the very air seemed to thicken and hum with a grotesque vitality. This wasn't a home. It was a hungry mouth. And I was not its meal. The thought was a desperate, burning ember. I spun, my gaze sweeping the room for an exit. The main door, the one I'd come through, was now half obscured by a curtain of heavy, moss-like growth, dripping a viscous, sweet-smelling fluid onto the polished floorboards. It looked like a living, breathing barrier. "No," I whispered, my voice raw. "You won't have me." I stumbled back, my foot catching on something soft and yielding. It seemed to pulse faintly, like a sluggish artery. This place was alive, truly and horribly alive. My eyes landed on the tall, arched window overlooking the overgrown gardens. It was my only chance. I grabbed a heavy brass candelabra from a nearby table, its weight oddly comforting in my grip. With a guttural cry, I swung it, shattering the glass in a cascade of glittering shards. The sudden noise was deafening in the otherwise hushed, throbbing manor. A sharp, sweet scent, like overripe fruit and damp earth, rushed in through the broken pane. It was the breath of the garden, the root's exhalation. I scrambled onto the windowsill, pushing aside the thorny branches that now clawed at the frame. The drop wasn't far, maybe 10 feet to the soft earth below, but the ground was a tangled mess of Elara's peculiar flora, now distorted and monstrous. I dropped, landing awkwardly on a bed of thick, spongy moss that cushioned my fall, but also seemed to cling to my clothes. The air was heavy, saturated with moisture and that cloying, earthy sweetness. The manor loomed behind me, its broken window like a gaping maw, silent for a moment, then emitting a low, resonant groan that vibrated through the ground beneath my feet. It was angry. It knew I was leaving. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, and plunged into the dense undergrowth. Every step was a struggle. The plants were taller than me, their leaves unnaturally broad, their stems thick and woody, twisting into grotesque shapes. They snagged at my clothes, clawed at my skin, their surfaces strangely slick. It was like moving through a hostile alien jungle. It wasn't just typical Pacific Northwest fog. This was denser, heavier, carrying the same earthy, metallic tang that I'd grown to associate with the root. I pushed through a particularly dense thicket, my arms aching, and burst into a clearing. It wasn't the manicured lawn I remembered from my arrival. Instead, it was a wide, desolate expanse, hemmed in by towering skeletal trees whose branches clawed at the gray sky. The ground was hard-packed earth, bare of any healthy growth, littered with strange, calcified fragments that crunched under my boots. The fog here was absolute. The air was utterly still, Silence save for the ragged sound of my own breathing and the distant, almost imperceptible thrumming that I knew was the manor, the root, alive and waiting. This wasn't just a garden anymore. It felt like a stage set for my final act. The realization hit me with a sickening lurch. I was trapped, not just by the physical barriers, but by the entity's pervasive influence, turning my escape route into another cage. I ran, blindly at first, then with a surge of desperate energy, towards where I thought the boundary of the estate lay. The fog was so thick I could barely see my own outstretched hand. Each breath was a struggle against the damp, heavy air, and I could feel an itching sensation on my skin, a phantom crawling under my clothes. Then, I saw it. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, a deep, resonant throb that seemed to echo in my bones. This wasn't just a part of the garden. This was a main artery, a conduit of the root itself blocking my way. This was the event, the final barrier. I paused, my chest heaving, my mind screaming. There was no way around it. It stretched out, disappearing into the impenetrable fog on either side. My eyes darted around, desperate for anything. My gaze fell on a broken branch, thick and heavy, lying half buried in the earth. It was crude, but it was all I had. I snatched it up, my hands gripping the rough bark. I wouldn't be absorbed. I wouldn't be another Elara. I raised the branch high, feeling the deep thrum of the vine beneath my feet. With all my strength, I brought it down, slamming it into the pulsing surface of the monstrous vine. A wet, tearing sound. The vine throbbed harder, a low, keening sound emanating from deep within it, a sound that was less plant and more pained animal. I struck again, and again, a frantic, desperate assault. Each blow was met with a surge of resistance, the vine seeming to writhe and recoil, but I pressed on, hacking away at its flesh. The sap coated my hands, my arms, burning faintly, but I ignored it. I had to break through. I had to. Finally, with a final ragged swing, the branch snapped. But the vine, though wounded and oozing, had been severed. A gap, just wide enough for me to squeeze through, had opened. I didn't hesitate. I plunged through the breach, pushing past the oozing, living flesh. The moment I was on the other side, the fog seemed to thin, just perceptibly. I ran, not looking back, my legs burning, my lungs screaming. I didn't stop until I reached the rusted iron gates, the boundary of the estate. The fog here was just normal fog, not the entity's breath. I was out. I was free. The itching on my skin intensified, a persistent, unsettling sensation. It was subtle, easily mistaken for a bruise or dirt. But I knew. The reveal was clear. A piece of the root, a tiny, insidious seed, had taken root within me. I had escaped Blackwood Manor, but not without being irrevocably changed. The manor remained, its ancient evil unbroken, waiting for its next inheritor, and I, Blake, was now a carrier, a living testament to its enduring horror.